Hey guys, this is Nia and today I will be painting a peach branch. This is a two-part video where I will be painting peaches in two different styles. So this is more of a semi-realistic and part two will be more of a doodle style. Without further ado, let's just get into it and begin to draw. To draw out the peach, I'm going to first start by drawing a circle, and then depending on where the peach is facing, I'm going to draw a small point which will be the bottom of the peach. Then I'm going to add the division of the peach, and this just follows the curvature of the round peach, so depending on where it's facing, the curve will follow. So maybe first try to draw out the peaches from different sides. Then if you're comfortable, you can start to tilt from top to bottom. Basically, if it's from the top, you can imagine a cross section from the middle of the peach and then draw out a circle for the space for the stem. Try to draw out different angles and start putting it together in a composition to see how you want to paint it out. This is a bit different to how I usually approach these tutorials because I want to add a bit more detail in the painting, so I decided to draw it out first instead of painting it freehand. Whereas in the next tutorial I will be posting next week, I will be showing you how I painted freehand as a doodle form, so it's much simpler and you can pick whichever approach you prefer. So while you're drawing out the composition, consider figuring how many peaches you want in the branch and figure out the layout of the peaches and the branch before adding the leaves or any other elements that should just add on to the main subject of your painting. If you're not too sure how to attach the leaves to the peach, you can also practice them separately before painting the branch. So if your composition turned out a bit more complicated than anticipated, you can always draw out the composition lightly before painting, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to take what I've drawn, and obviously you can do a few sketches until you like the composition, but just to get the video going, I'm just going to draw it straight away. And if something doesn't feel right, you can erase and adjust on the spot. It really doesn't matter, just do as you feel is correct. I'm just going to speed up the drawing here because I'm just following the smaller sketch that I previously did, with maybe some leaves or positioning that might be slightly different. Because you will most likely be drawing this freehand too, I suggest for you to create your own composition according to your liking, so the painting is personalized to you. You can take your time with this step and make sure you like what you've drawn out before painting them. When I paint, I like to start with the branch. This is just to remind myself which part will be seen and which part of the branch will be hidden behind the fruits or the leaves, because my sketch is really rough. For this, I start with just the color sepia, but you can also do other browns if you prefer a lighter brown color. Once I've established the branches, I started painting the peach, and for this I use permanent yellow deep as the base color, and as the paint is still wet, I added some permanent rose into the permanent yellow deep to create an orange. I like to paint one peach at a time because if I paint all three at once, I think that the surface of the paper will dry out too quickly and I wouldn't be able to create the wet on wet look that I'm looking for the base layer. So as you can see here, I'm now mixing the orange and I'm putting it down while the surface of the yellow is still quite wet. And by putting more color and more water, now the surface is even more wet and I'm going back in just with the rose color now. And I'm painting blotches randomly of the rose color by itself so it blends naturally with the rest of the orange, giving a really nice wet on wet effect of the peach color. This is still the base layer though, so I'm going to build up on this later on. But before we do that, I'm going to move on with the other peaches. And I'm just going to follow the same steps, but this time I'm just going to go straight in with the orange because I find that the yellow was a bit redundant. So I just used the mixed permanent yellow deep and the rose to create the orange as the base color, and as the base color is still wet, I'm adding the wet on wet technique with the rose again and I'm painting randomly. Where the curvature is, I'm going to add a bit more of the rose color just to define the shape of the peach a bit more. And I'm just going to repeat this for the last peach. But if you have more than three, of course, you can go ahead and do the same thing for the rest of them. Now I'm going to move on to the last element, and for the base color of the leaves, I'm going to mix a mixture of Prussian blue and Orlin yellow with a dark blue color and a transparent bright yellow color. I find that this will give you a nice range of greens because you can create many shades with them. And I like to mix some yellow green or cooler greens as I paint the leaves to create a little bit of variety so it doesn't look too one-dimensional. Now I'm going to use a bit more sepia for the branch to paint a little bit of texture. So I'm going to do short brush strokes to get the bark effect, but since I'm using the same color, it will just be a very subtle texture. I'm going to build on the peaches again by using the same permanent yellow deep and the rose from earlier, and I'm using a thick consistency to start getting the vibrancy that I'm looking for. And because I'm using a thicker consistency which is less watery, I'm going to work in sections. So after I place some yellow in the area according to the base color, I'm going to quickly clean my brush and pick up some of the rose color and continue on from the yellow to create a smooth transition. Keep doing this while the paint is still wet so each transition of color will have a nice natural blend. I'm going to add another layer of the green, and I'm going to use a slightly thicker consistency, and I'm imagining which parts will be in shadow, and in some areas I just painted another layer on to get a better definition. I'm going to keep layering where I feel like I need to also separate certain parts of the leaves, like where it folds, so it doesn't look too flat, but it looks like a separate part of the leaf, like the back and the front. And after that, I'm also going to add a little bit of detail for the midribs and also the veins of the leaves. I like to also place some darker greens in random spots of the leaf so it feels like there are sunspots where the light is shining through certain parts. It's up to you though whether you want to include that part or not, but I just thought it'll be a bit fun to bring about interest to the leaves. I'm just continuing to go back and forth to balance out the colors, and you can do this according to the stage of your painting. You can either add more layers or even less than mine. For me, I find that the pink of the peach is a bit too muted and light, so I'm going to add a bit of Crimson Lake to add a slightly darker tone of red, and I'm going to apply that fairly lightly in the pink areas, but I don't want to go too overboard with this because the red color is fairly deep. If I'm uncertain about some parts, I like to paint lightly first and wait for that layer to dry because it'll always dry lighter, and if it's still too light, I can add more layers, or if it's a bit too dark, I'll try to balance it out with the rest of the painting. I like to also add a bit of the Crimson Lake where the curvature of the peaches are, so I can separate the sections of the peach. And to do this, I just apply a little bit of the Crimson Lake very lightly, and using a clean damp brush, I like to blend out the colors so it doesn't look too harsh. For this peach that I'm painting right now, I feel like it's not as vibrant as the other two peaches, so I'm going to add a bit of the rose color with some of the yellow in parts where it's a bit more pink or a bit more orange, and just add another layer. I'm then going to mix the Crimson Lake with the Permanent Yellow Deep to create a muted orange color, and I'm going to use that color as shadows to separate the peaches. Here I feel like part of the branch is looking a bit too light, so I added more of the sepia in the area where I thought need a bit more definition. At any point of the painting, if you feel like a certain area is looking a little bit too empty, I like to actually add a few more leaves because naturally they can grow anywhere. And for this, I intentionally only put one layer or two for these leaves, so there are parts where the leaves have more detail and for these ones they don't, so I think that adds a different interest and also a nice dimension to the painting. Now, because I've added a bit more layers and vibrancy to the leaves, I feel like the peach are drying a bit too muted and light again, so I wanted to add more vibrancy by adding the permanent yellow deep and also the rose color on top of the peach again, just to redefine the colors again and bring up the vibrancy so it balances out with the rest of the painting. And after that layer have dried, I like to mix some white gouache with a little bit of the permanent yellow deep to create a really light yellow tint, and I'm going to use this as the highlight of the peach, so I'm just going to add in a few sections and also some of the curvature to redefine it a little bit more. And last but not least, I mixed in some of the Crimson Lake with the sepia to create this reddish brown color, and I'm using that to outline some of the parts which cast some shadows. So I'm not outlining every single thing, but just some parts to separate the different elements. And I'm using this color quite lightly. And I'm also going to use this color to maybe redefine some of the veins of the leaves again if I feel like it's looking a little bit flat. You can basically use this just as the final touch-up of the painting, but it should be very subtle. If not, it will look a bit too cartoony if the outline is too clear. To finalize your painting, I always like to take a step back and look at the overall painting instead of little sections. This way you get an overall feel and you get to figure out which parts you want to blend or which parts you need to add a bit of vibrancy. This is how I approach all of my paintings, so just remember to always look at it as a whole instead of just doing little details separately. And that's basically it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you're interested in the doodle version, don't forget to check out next week's video. I personally like the doodle version a bit more because I find that the colors are a bit more cutesy and pastel, which I like, but I just thought I would share with you both versions. Anyway, thanks for watching till the end, and I will see you at the next one. Bye!